going to go ahead and introduce Simon Dunn. Simon, like Lucy, is with Keenest Mustard Marketing, and he is a design expert, and he's going to be talking about using design thinking to make your insights marketing look great. Simon.
Thank you, Dana. Hello, everyone. Just to introduce myself, I've been working as a designer within the market research business for 15 years now. I suppose uniquely as a designer, I work on the marketing side and I also work on the deliverable side of things as well. Obviously, being in market research, it's something that comes with the territory. So let's get started. So the way we present ourselves obviously affects people's perception of us. And you can imagine that if I had a raging toothache, I wouldn't particularly want to go to this dental practice. And as marketeers, the way we present our deliverables and our brand, obviously that affects the perception of our company as a whole. And I just wanted to introduce you to my daughter, who's Georgina. She's aged 3.5. And she's growing up in an environment where there's design all around us. On the television, posters, internet, that kind of, she's surrounded and immersed in design. Far more so than I was at her age. And moving on from that, we as marketeers are increasingly involved in design, and it's increasingly important to us through our deliverables and our brand itself. And as such, I just wanted to take you through some design principles. So as a designer, when you go and do a design course at university, you're taught some underlying design principles that are the foundation of all design. And as I say, as marketeers, coming from a sort of a marketing background, we get involved in design decisions all the time. We're working with designers, we're looking at designs, we're making judgments about designs. But often, unless you come from a design background, you're not actually aware of the design principles underlying reasons why things are laid out in a particular way. So I thought it's it's quite useful to run through those elements. So as I say, these design principles, they're kind of a loose grouping of principles. There's no hard and fast rules. The first one is hierarchy. I'm going to hop up on the stage here. I'm rather hoping I'm not going to do a Dave Grohl and fall off the stage. But here you can see this selection of boxes, and your eye's immediately drawn to the two yellow boxes in the middle. The chances are your eye goes up to the large grey box at the top left-hand corner, and then across to the smaller boxes, and then you take in the other grey boxes surrounding it. And that's the hierarchy, so that's the order in which you actually look at a design. So I've got an example here. It's a poster for a festival. You can see there's obviously a hierarchy running through here, and I've actually marked up what I think that hierarchy is. There was quite a bit of discussion in the office as to exactly what that hierarchy is, and I got disagreed with a fair amount. But this is what we came to the conclusion. Now, obviously, 4-Day Weekend is the first thing that you're seeing, and your eye's naturally drawn up to Sazio Presents, which is obviously the name of the DJ, the person presenting the event. And then down to sort of a little bit more detail about the event, your eyes working its way down to the what's going on what day, and then finally down to the sponsors. And this is essentially the designer communicating with you. They're saying, this is the most important part of this poster. This is the large, impactful bit that's going to, I really want you to take in. And then is guiding you down through the different hierarchy of that poster. And that's essentially, fundamentally, how the principle of hierarchy works. The second design principle is alignment. I've read a very good metaphor for alignment, which was, if you imagine you went shopping at the supermarket, you parked your car, but there were no white lines. Everyone parked their car in all different sorts of directions, sort of abandoned their cars in the car park. And you abandoned your car as well, and you went in and did your shopping, and you came out. you looked at this sea of cars and you'd have no idea where your car was. Because we have the white lines and everyone parks in a conformed, sort of aligned manner, we know exactly where we are in the car park. We can find that information easily. We know where everything is, and that's how alignment works. And also there's it's pleasing to the eye for things to be aligned and sort of laid out in a uniform manner. And this poster is actually quite a nice example of alignment here. You can see that you've got Gregory House in the middle there, and then everything else is aligned to everything else. It's all perfectly lined to one another. You've got these vertical lines here. You've got a 5-degree angle running here across the piece itself. And then you've got Greg House in the middle. Now, you'll notice also that if you were to draw a centre line down the middle of him, he's actually at 90 degrees to this horizontal line here. Now, you could think that potentially the designers started with the image that he's got there, which he noticed was at a certain angle, and then built everything else up off the top of that, using alignment as the core element of the design. Third principle, we've got balance. So obviously this isn't literal balance, it's visual balance. And you can see here there's two types of balance. You've got the asymmetrical balance where you've got different weights but different distances from the fulcrum. And you've obviously also got symmetrical balance. It's all sort of pretty self-explanatory. And we've got a nice example of balance here. So this is visual balance, as I mentioned before. It sounds a little bit pretentious, but basically if you were to draw a line from the bottom left-hand corner here up to the top right-hand corner, you'd see there's a visual alignment between the design here. So you've got the Kiblin logo at the top, and you've got the weight of this P shape and the dots at the bottom, and there's a balance there. The piece is balanced out, so it looks right. It looks as though it's fitting and in place, and that's the way balance works. You don't want to design to be sort of out of kilter, if you like. Then you've got proximity. There's actually 4 levels of proximity. There's close edge, there's overlap, and there's combine. Proximity is basically the more you group things, the more part of a whole they are. So the more part of a whole piece, and the more sort of, the communication is that these are very important things that are seen together. So the closer they are, obviously the communication is the more important that they are sort of to be read together. So we've got an example here of, everyone will be familiar with the YSL logo. So again, this is overlap, where all these things are actually combined together. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the S actually represents a thread running through it. I like to think that, but as I say, this is quite a nice example of how sort of proximity works. And then you've got consistency and repetition. So the human brain obviously likes to see things in the same place at the same time. There's understanding, and for example, that my slide number is always going to be in the same place. It would be incredibly annoying if I moved it around the slide and it was different places, and your eye had to go to these different places to see it. So this is kind of the underlying reason behind consistency and repetition. It's just having in the same places. And branding is a perfect example of consistency and repetition. We always obviously use the same logo, presented in the same way, the same colours, the same fonts. We even use the same type of imagery, the same illustrations if your brand's got illustrations to go along with it. So again, branding is a sort of very, very good example of this sort of consistency and repetition in things that you're producing. And also contrast. So contrast is a way of kind of emphasizing or de-emphasizing things. So as you can see, the squares on the left-hand side are far more emphasized, so they kind of pop out at you a little bit more. So if you were to use contrast to highlight something, that would obviously bring it forward and sort of make it more important in your eye. And then on the right-hand side, you've got far less contrast, which suggests it's a sort of a bit less important, a little bit pushed out the way. So, for example, an example of that might be if you have on a slide, you might have your base sizes down here and you have it in a grey box with white text out of it, so it's quite knocked back and not very obvious. Whereas if you've got a really key point on this slide, you might use a very bright box with white text out of it to kind of really draw the eye to it. So again, that's an example of how contrast works. Now, strictly speaking, this isn't a design, but I do quite like it anyway. So a brilliant example of contrast, very eye-catching. It brings your eye to it. You've got these autumnal colours coming across the top of the stained glass window. And you've also got the blue of the ocean and the sky above to sort of, contrast across with it. So again, very eye-catching. It brings your eye to it and grabs your attention. And then I suppose a design principle that most people have actually heard of before, white space. It doesn't always have to be white, it can be any colour. And white space, again, sort of a bit of a pretentious phrase, but it allows the design to breathe. So it stops the design becoming overwhelming. So if, for example, you had a slide or a poster or a brochure absolutely full of text and images, it would feel overwhelming and you wouldn't be invited in, you wouldn't feel as though you wanted to read it or take interest in it. But by adding white space, you can allow it to breathe and you can make it feel a lot more approachable and sort of digestible to a large extent. So again, this is a poster here, not using white space, but using blue instead. We've got this large area here to the left-hand side of blue space that just allows it to breathe a little bit. The temptation would be to scale the bike up to fill the area and make the text a lot bigger. But as it is, it's far more approachable as a design and works very well. And you can also see a little element of balance here, and you've got this quite heavy, bold text in the bottom left-hand corner, sort of counterbalancing with the flowers in the top right-hand corner. And then the grid. So in some respects, not entirely a design principle, but something that fundamentally underlies most designs. So the first thing a designer do when they're creating something is actually lay down a grid, which is a sort of series of columns and horizontal rows, and it allows you to put images and text, and you can cross those columns and you can cross the rows, but it gives you a structure, a framework to design within. So this is an example of a grid in action. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got these three columns coming down, and everything drops into those three columns. You can see in the top left-hand corner there, that introductory text, that they've actually pushed it across two of the two left-hand columns. The PM drops into the right-hand, and even down here you can see that the images and the logos drop into that column format. And you'll find as you start to look around at designs and that sort of thing, you'll start to recognise that grid format in everything around us. And it could be a 12-column grid, it could be a 2-column grid, but fundamentally they tend to sort of underlie all designs. Now, on the right-hand side, we've got a slightly different grid. They've changed it a little bit. So essentially, we've got a 2-column grid here. We've got the 11 in this left-hand side, and then we've got this series of text here on the right-hand side. But in this case, there's the 0 and the 9 and the 0 and the 3 that have actually been pushed off of the grid a little bit. They're actually not sitting on the grid. Now, as I say, these principles are principles, not rules, so you are allowed to break, or a designer's allowed to break them to some extent. But you will notice that the 0 and the 1 actually still line up and they balance across each other. So although you've broken the grid, you've still got balance running through the actual design itself. So it doesn't look, again, it doesn't look out of kilter, it doesn't look wrong in your eye. So that's effectively the design principles. As I say, they're principles rather than rules. There's a lot of material out there about them. I've kind of gathered together what I felt were the really pertinent ones, and you can obviously look into it a lot more and find out a lot more about it. And I just wanted to take you through a little bit about resources and inspiration as well for sort of for design work generally, and starting to look at designs in the environment. So, as I mentioned earlier on, we're surrounded by design. There's designs in this room. you go out onto the subway and there's posters everywhere and brochures and so forth. So we're surrounded by it, and it's really useful to actually start being aware of it and thinking about, you know, how it's put together. Is there anything that really clashes with your eye? How that relates to the design rules and the design principles that we talked about. And you know, just keep an eye open in the you know, out and about for design, and there's some great stuff out there. And then obviously on the internet as well, there's a lot of designers forums, people posting lots of designs on various websites like Behance and Design Inspiration. So again, keeping an eye on these just to get a feel for what's out there and sort of get a feel for different inspiration that you can have from it. And also the non-designer's design book. Rather ironically, it's very badly designed, as you can see, but it's actually it's a very well-known resource, and it takes you through the principles of design and how things are laid out and how you can think about how things are laid out in a very sort of simple way. And I always think that the wonderful thing about design is that it's kind of almost an endless opportunity to learn. Because you know, I always feel as though I'm learning. I'm always picking up tips here and there and sort of ideas and that kind of thing. And as I say, it's a wonderful thing to be aware of and to start thinking about and looking out at you know, what's out there and getting inspiration from. So, as I say, a bit of a brief presentation, so hopefully it made up a bit of time. But okay. Hi.
I have two. Is that on? Yeah? Okay. One is incredibly easy, and then the other one, medium. So a lot of us who are still working in PowerPoint, so think about PowerPoint slides.
Yes.
You go back and forth about having your logo on every slide, like on a pitch. You know, it's like, do you put it on the front? Do you put it on the back? You put it all the way through.
Yes.
Seems like a lot of color, clutter. So that's the simple one, because I think you probably can answer that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My inclination is, though this presentation's had it on every slide, and my inclination is to actually put it on divider slides and cover slides. Quite often what we might do is actually put the web address in the bottom right-hand corner, so it's a reference to the brand, but not as bold, as you say, as cluttered as a logo. So that's actually quite a nice, subtle way of still referencing your brand, but you know, in a more sort of restrained way.
Well, and I think that for some companies, maybe say they're under 50 million research firm, you can't constantly be changing your logo. It may be tied to your trademark, so it becomes expensive to do some of that. But yet it may be a little out of style with maybe what you want to try to do. So having it not on every page is a lovely thing too,
That's
right?
it. And it frees up some space on your PowerPoint as well.
It does.
Because you know,
so you can put more words on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Big images.
Big images. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was kidding, right? And then the second one is more. Certainly, I think all of us are seeing the need both for storytelling, and I'm a big proponent of that, but also within a research firm having a some sort of design person in-house, because not only your marketing, but all your deliverables really need to start, you know, changing.
Yes, absolutely.
Where is the best place to get or seek out someone like that, fresh out of school, or is it a couple years under their belt? What would your recommendation be?
I guess it depends what you're looking for. I mean, we recently worked with a company, and they had some feedback from some research they did with their clients, and the feedback was that they were performing in every way very well, except for their deliverables. And they asked us in to look at their PowerPoint template, and we were obviously happy to look at their PowerPoint template, but we also suggested that probably wasn't enough to actually lift them up. So we did some training in-house, and we also recommended that they hire a graphic designer. And really, it's the kind of level of seniority, because they were having quite a lot of trouble with trying to get people within the business to think in a design way and do the storytelling thing that everyone's been talking about today, and actually visually design their presentations. And they needed someone with authority to carry it through. So they went for a kind of more of a middleweight designer rather than a junior designer. So to some extent, it depends on kind of what you're trying to achieve, and sort of, how gently you want to kind of integrate the design side of things.
So in my experience, I don't think there's any point in most research insights type companies recruiting junior designers, because all they're doing is tidying up something that's already pretty bad. They're putting lipstick on a gorilla. And you need somebody with much more gravitas and a really good understanding of storytelling and the seniority and experience to push back and say, this is not part of the story, this is not going to work. You need to, someone who can really be at a level with the teams putting the stuff together. Otherwise, they're just purely executional and it won't solve the problem. So.
I agree with you. I think that in one instance for me, and people were confused. I'm with King Consulting, but I took a break and ran a company for 2 years. Glad to be back doing marketing consulting. Anyway, is that I was such a marketer as the COO of the company that I was actually the person and directed. But I agree with you. I think the tidying up comment is perfect. It's not changing the culture of a company, right? It's worth it. You're not.
And in many ways, I think it does damage, because what happens is they get a poor, put-upon junior designer in who then has to spend their whole time making these crappy slides, to be honest, look a little bit better. And then they get the feedback from the clients that their slides are no better, which they're not, because they're not telling a story. And so then they just ditch the designer. They said that didn't work. And what they haven't really thought about is actually engendering the culture of storytelling and, and design and within the organization. So, yeah.
So the question I had is, you go to obviously you just go out and try to hire somebody.
Yes.
Graphic design school,
Well, there'll be sort of recruitment consultants that specialise in design and that you could go to. But yes, of course, you could sort of, advertising on LinkedIn is very effective if you do a job ad on LinkedIn, if you want to take that route. It just depends on sort of, how much of a DIY approach, I suppose, you want to some extent.
To build on that question, do you find, from all of your experience of, I'm loud, do you find that it's hard to recruit designers to work in market research and they can come work at JWT and build UX?
Yes.
Code
Yes.
GFK, right?
And we do have to be quite careful how we qualify designers as well, because obviously we don't want them to be disappointed with the work that they're going to end up doing with us. So we need to kind of set expectations to some extent, and also, in fairness, a lot of designers will run a mile as soon as you talk about PowerPoint as well, because it's not something they're interested in working with. And really, another presentation we do, I talk about PowerPoint as being design software effectively, and we never really think of it as design software. We think of it as PowerPoint. But in reality, it's not that far removed from Illustrator or InDesign or something like that. You're still assembling words and pictures on in a medium. So it's partly the headspace and sort of, partly, yes, there is the glamour of the JWTs and the cool design agencies, and some people are happy to come and work with market research agencies because they're interested in what you do. So it's just getting the right person.
This might be a two-part question as well. Have you seen successful stories or case studies of when, either in the RFP or in the deliverable that they desire, you have to use a template they've provided or a form that they've provided and still try to communicate your brand or communicate your story in that same, in the same space, I guess?
Yes.
As that.
I mean, it's very difficult to, obviously underlying, if you're talking about PowerPoint, then, underlying PowerPoint, it's very difficult to design within a template if it's quite restrictive. It depends on the number of rules that are put down. So, for example, I used to, many years ago when I first started working in market research, I used to work with Jaguar, and they had very strict rules about what the slide should look like, and it gave us very limited options for actually telling a story and being graphical. But within a template itself, you know, if you have got a little bit of freedom within the template to do something yourself, you can integrate the colours and the style of the brand that you're working within in a sort of creative way to tell a story. I don't think it's exclusive. You know, it's not you can't. It's not as though you can't do that if you're working within a template.
I'm just paraphrasing what Lucy said. I think throughout the day, what we've heard is you've got to have a great story before we can do great storytelling.
Yeah.
And often we confuse the two, or we skip straight to the storytelling because that is the most tangible part. But we can't skip the part where we actually take time to craft the right story, and that is so critical.
Yes.
The second is really a plug for an excellent book, which is called Presentation Zen. It's really great at telling you how to design impactful slides in PowerPoint, but also does give you some pointers on telling an impactful story. So if you don't have a graphic designer, you can kind of teach yourself how to build a good story as well as bring it to life through a compelling storytelling.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay, thank you.